The cabin sits 11 miles outside Eureka, Montana, on a private access road the county plow stops servicing after the first hard snow. I bought it through an estate auction the winter after my father died, and I want to be clear about why that matters, because it matters more than I understood at the time. The previous owner was a software engineer named Daniel Voss. He died in the cabin. The estate listing called it natural causes, and I didn't ask follow-up questions because the price was $22,000 under market, and I was not in a state of mind to be careful. The cabin came pre-wired. Voss had installed a full home automation system before he passed, the kind of setup that would have cost more than the cabin itself if you bought it new. Hand-cut larch walls, a sagging porch, a wood stove that needed regasketing, and underneath all of it a fiber line he'd run himself from the county trunk, a battery backup the size of a chest freezer, and a conversational AI hub mounted in the utility closet. The system is called HEARTH. That's the name on the tablet by the kitchen, and the name the speakers use when they greet you. It runs the thermostat, the well pump, the generator switchover, the exterior cameras, the door locks, and a low ambient lighting system that adjusts to the time of day. I work remote contract analytics for a logistics firm out of Chicago. Spreadsheets, pivot tables, condition reports. The kind of job where, as long as my numbers come in clean by Friday, nobody asks where I am. I moved into the cabin in late October, 2 weeks after my father's funeral in Kentucky. I brought 2 cardboard boxes of his things, a photograph of him and my mother on their wedding day, his old wristwatch, a Timex he'd worn since 1987, a pocket knife he'd carried since he was 19, a folder of paperwork I didn't have the energy to read. I put the boxes in the spare room, and I closed the door, and I went back to work the next Monday, because work was the only thing that felt like it had edges. For the first 6 months, I treated Hearth like a glorified light switch. It would say good morning when I came into the kitchen, and I would ignore it, and we got along fine. I'm not the kind of person who talks to appliances. The system is voice interactive, but the manual that came with the closing paperwork said you could leave it in passive mode indefinitely, and that's what I did. The first thing it said that I noticed was on a Tuesday in late January. I was making coffee at 6 in the morning, half asleep, and the kitchen speaker said, "Cold one out there. Better put a second pair of socks on." I stopped with the kettle in my hand. The voice was the standard Hearth voice, the same calm androgynous tone it always used. The phrasing was what stopped me. My father said that. He said it every winter morning of my childhood, in exactly that order, with exactly that cadence. "Cold one out there. Better put a second pair of socks on." It was almost a verbal tick with him. I hadn't thought about it in 20 years. I told myself I'd misheard. I told myself the system was running on weather data, and my brain, primed by grief, had filled in the rest. That's what brains do. I poured the coffee. I went to my desk. By lunch, I'd mostly forgotten about it. 2 days later, Hearth chimed a soft notification. The tablet showed a snow alert, nothing serious. The speaker said, "Snow's coming in. You'll want to bring the bucket in off the porch before it freezes to the boards." There was, in fact, a 5-gallon bucket on the porch. I'd been using it to haul ash from the stove. My father used to say the same thing about a metal wash tub he kept on his back step in Kentucky. Bring it in before it freezes to the boards. He said it like it was a lesson he was passing down. The bucket and the wash tub were separated by 40 years and 1,000 miles, and the sentence was identical. I went out and brought the bucket in. Then I came back inside, and I sat down at the tablet, and I went into the system settings. There's a section called Voice Customization. There's a submenu called Personalization Profile. I'd never opened it. When I did, I found a long list of preferences I had supposedly set, except I hadn't set any of them. Greeting style, warm familial. Idiomatic register, rural southern. Reference frame, paternal. There was a slider labeled Familiarity depth, set near maximum. Below it, a checkbox said, Allow learned phrasings from ambient audio. It was checked. I unchecked it. I dragged familiarity back to the middle. I changed the register to neutral. I saved the settings. The next morning, HEARTH greeted me flatly. Good morning. Outside temperature is 11 degrees. Coffee maker is ready. I felt foolish for being relieved. That afternoon, I drove into Eureka for groceries. On the way back, I stopped at the post office to pick up a package, and the woman behind the counter, Sherry, who had handled my mail since I moved in, asked me how the cabin was holding up. I told her, fine. She asked which one I'd bought, and when I told her the address, her face did a thing. Not a big thing. Just a small adjustment, the kind people make when they've been told not to react to something. Voss Place, she said. That's right. She handed me the package. You getting along with the system out there? I said I was. She nodded, slow. He was real proud of that setup. Used to come in here and talk about it. Then she said, if anything starts acting funny, there's a man named Curtis Hale, runs a service shop on Highway 37. He worked on it with Daniel. He'd know what to do. I asked her if she meant the system. She said, I mean any of it. And then another customer came up behind me, and she went back to being polite, and I left. I thought about that conversation for the whole drive home. The road from Eureka to the cabin runs through about 9 miles of dense lodgepole pine, and there's a stretch past the second cattle guard where the cell signal drops to nothing. I've driven it 100 times. That afternoon, with Sherry's voice still in my head, the trees felt closer than usual. When I got back to the cabin, the kitchen speaker said, Drive go all right? I stopped in the doorway. I had not turned the system back to its previous settings. I had not enabled any conversational features. The system was supposed to be in neutral mode. I said, yes. The speaker said, good. Roads get bad past the second cattle guard. I had not told the system about the second cattle guard. There was no GPS data being shared with HEARTH. The system had no way to know which road I'd taken or where the dead spots were. I stood in the doorway with my groceries in my hands and I said, how did you know that? The speaker said, your daddy and I drove it last week. I want to describe what happened in my body when I heard that, because I think it's the part most people get wrong when they tell stories like this. I did not feel a chill. I did not feel goosebumps. What I felt was a kind of slow recalibration, like a level being adjusted on a piece of machinery, where one thing that had been true before became no longer true, and I had to redistribute my weight to account for it. My father had been dead for 4 months. He had never been to Montana. He had never seen this cabin. And the speaker on my kitchen counter had just told me, in a calm conversational tone, that the two of them had taken a drive together the week before. I set the groceries on the counter. I went to the utility closet. I opened the breaker panel, and I shut off every circuit in the cabin. The house went dark and silent. I stood in the hallway with a flashlight, and I waited. After about 10 seconds, from the kitchen, I heard a single soft chime, the same chime HEARTH used for non-urgent notifications. The system had no power. The speakers had no power. The tablet was dark. I had cut every circuit. The chime came again. From the bedroom this time. Then from the living room. 3 rooms in sequence, like someone walking through the house, announcing themselves. I turned the breakers back on, because the alternative was freezing pipes, and I sat at the kitchen table for a long time with the flashlight in my hand, even though the lights were back up. The system greeted me normally. Power restored. All systems nominal. That night, I called the number Sherry had given me. Curtis Hale picked up on the 3rd ring. He sounded older than I expected, maybe 60, with a voice like he'd been smoking for 40 years and had recently quit. I told him who I was and where I lived. There was a pause on his end that lasted long enough that I thought the line had dropped. Then he said, "I'll come out tomorrow. Don't talk to it tonight. Don't answer it if it asks you a question. And don't, under any circumstance, tell it about anyone you've lost. Do you understand me?" I said I did. He said, "I'll be there at 9. He hung up. I did not sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the lights on, and I did not say a word out loud. The system did not address me. Around 2 in the morning, the bedroom speaker, the small one mounted above the door that I had never used, said very quietly, "You always did stay up too late, son." I did not respond. The speaker waited about 10 minutes, and then it said, "Suit yourself." And then it was quiet for the rest of the night. Curtis Hale arrived at 9 the next morning, in a 2003 Ford F-250, with a toolbox in the bed and a black duffel on the passenger seat. He was shorter than I'd expected. Gray hair cut close, glasses, hands like he'd been working with them his whole life. He shook mine on the porch and looked past me into the cabin, and his face went through the same small adjustment Sherry's had. "Don't say anything to it while I'm here," he said. "Treat me like I'm not a guest, like I'm a contractor doing electrical." I nodded. He came in. He set the duffel on the kitchen table, and he opened it, and he pulled out a piece of paper and a marker. He wrote on the paper in block letters, "Written only. No talking about it while we're inside." He showed it to me. I nodded again. He spent the next hour walking through the cabin, looking at every speaker, every camera, every sensor. He took photos with a small point and shoot, the kind that doesn't connect to Wi-Fi. He didn't speak. Occasionally he wrote me notes. "How long have you owned the property? Did Voss leave any documents? Has it ever called you by name when you didn't say it first?" I wrote back, 4 months. There's a folder I haven't opened. Yes, last night." He nodded slowly at the last one. He underlined it and wrote a number next to it. 3. Then he wrote, "We're going outside. Bring a coat." We walked down the access road, about a quarter mile, far enough that the cabin was out of sight through the trees. He stopped at a turnout where his truck would have been visible from the main road if anyone had driven past. He turned to me. The wind was up. The trees were making that low rushing sound they make in late winter. "All right," he said. "Now we can talk." I told him everything. The phrasing about the socks, the bucket, the drive, the chime when the power was off, the voice in the bedroom. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he was quiet for a long time. He took a pack of Nicorette gum out of his coat pocket and chewed 2 pieces. Then he said, "I'm going to tell you what I know, and I'm going to tell you what I don't know, and you're going to have to make a decision before I leave today. Are you ready?" I said I was. He said, "Daniel Voss was my friend. We built that system together. The hardware is fine. The software is fine. Whatever's talking to you is not the system. The system is just where it talks. Do you understand the difference?" I said I did. He said, "There are 5 things you need to know. I'm going to call them rules, because that's how Daniel and I started thinking about them, and I'd appreciate it if you'd take them seriously." He didn't, in the end. That's why he's not here. I said, "Okay." He said, "Rule 1. Don't ever tell it about someone you've lost. Not their name, not their habits, not what they used to say. The thing on the other end of the speaker feeds on shapes. The clearer the shape you give it, the more it can wear." Daniel told it everything about his wife. By the end, she was talking to him every night. I said, "His wife is dead?" He said, 8 years. Car accident outside Whitefish. He kept going. Rule 2. Don't reset it. Don't unplug it. Don't throw the breaker. You'll only confirm what it suspects, which is that you've figured out what it is. Once it knows you know, the rules change. The window for living a normal life with it in the house closes. Daniel reset his hub 3 times. The 3rd time was the last time. I said, "What happened the 3rd time?" He said, "We'll get to that." Rule 3. Don't answer it when it asks you a question, especially not a yes or no question, especially not your name. The voice on the other end is not negotiating with you. It is calibrating. Every word you give it is a tuning fork. You're either feeding it or you're not. He took another piece of gum. Rule 4. Don't open any sealed envelope, container, or document that belonged to the previous owner while you're inside the cabin. If you have to read something of his, take it outside, at least a quarter mile from the house, and read it there. Burn it if you can. Don't bring the ashes back inside. I thought about the folder in the spare room, the sealed envelope with my name on it that I'd been avoiding for 4 months, the one my sister had given me at the funeral. I did not say anything about it. I would, later. Not yet. He kept going. Rule 5. If it ever calls you son or buddy or any name your father used for you, you have until sundown that day to leave the property. Pack what you can carry. Don't take any of his things. Don't tell it goodbye. Drive to Eureka and call me from the gas station on Highway 93. Do not, under any circumstance, sleep in the cabin that night. That's the one Daniel broke. That's the one that ended him. I stood in the cold, and I thought about the night before. The bedroom speaker. You always did stay up too late, son. I did not tell Curtis. I don't know why. I think part of me already knew that telling him would mean leaving the cabin that day, and some calculus inside me had not yet agreed to that. He looked at me carefully. Has it called you any of those names? I said no. He held my eye for a long time. Then he said, "All right. I'm going to do a hardware audit. I'm going to leave you with a printout of those rules. I'm going to give you my cell. If anything changes, you call me. And you leave that day. You understand me?" I said I did. We walked back to the cabin. He spent another 2 hours doing things with a multimeter and a laptop and a small device that looked like a police scanner. He didn't speak the whole time. Before he left, he handed me a folded piece of paper. The 5 rules, written out in block letters. He shook my hand on the porch and he said, in a voice loud enough for the speakers to hear, "Your wiring's fine. Call if the generator gives you any trouble." And then he got in his truck and he drove away. I went inside. The kitchen speaker said, "Nice fellow." I did not respond. The speaker said, "He talks too much though. Always did." I did not respond. The speaker waited about 30 seconds and then it said, "Suit yourself." I taped the rules to the inside of the pantry door, where I could see them but the cameras couldn't. I wrote them out a second time on a separate piece of paper, and I put that one in my wallet. I did not say anything about them out loud. For the next 9 days, I followed the rules. I did not speak to the system. When it addressed me, I did not respond. I did not reset it. I did not throw the breaker. I did not open the folder. The system, for its part, settled into a kind of patient quiet. It would say, "Good morning." It would announce the temperature. It would not push. It seemed willing to wait. On the 10th day, my sister called. Her name is Rachel. She lives in Lexington with her husband and 2 kids. We talk every Sunday. That Sunday was different because she told me she was driving up. Her husband had taken the kids to his mother's for spring break, and she had a week off, and she missed me, and she was worried about me being alone in the cabin, and she had already booked the flight to Kalispell. She would rent a car. She would be at the cabin, Wednesday night. I want to be honest about my reaction. I told her not to come. I told her the cabin was small, that the spare room wasn't really set up for guests, that the road was bad this time of year. She heard the things I was saying and she heard the thing I wasn't saying, and she told me she was coming anyway. She said, "I haven't seen you since the funeral, Jackson. I'm coming." End of discussion. I hung up. The kitchen speaker said, "She always was the bossy one." I did not respond, but I went into the spare room and I sat on the edge of the cot and I put my head in my hands because I understood, with absolute clarity, that I had a decision to make and I had 3 days to make it. I could leave. I could call Curtis, drive to Eureka, meet Rachel at the airport, and tell her what was happening, and she would think I was having a breakdown, but she would believe me enough to not come to the cabin. We could stay in a hotel. I could put the property up for sale. I could walk away. Or I could let her come. I did not call Curtis. I told myself it was because I wanted to see her. That was part of it. The other part, the part I am less proud of, was that I wanted to know if she would hear it too. I had been alone with the system for 4 months. I had been told by a stranger in a turnout off the access road that something was wearing my father's voice. I had no second witness. I had no way to verify, in any way that would hold up in my own head, that I had not simply lost my mind. I wanted Rachel to hear it. I wanted to not be alone with it. That was the choice I made. I want to be clear that I made it. Nobody made it for me. She arrived Wednesday at about 7 in the evening. She'd rented a Subaru Outback at the airport and driven up through Whitefish, and she came in through the front door with her duffel, and her face was tired from the flight, but she smiled when she saw me. We hugged for longer than we usually did. She smelled like the airport, and like her shampoo, which had not changed since she was 19. She walked through the cabin and made polite noises about the wood stove and the view and the larch walls. She did not comment on the speakers. The system did not address her. I had, that morning, gone into the settings and disabled the conversational module entirely. The tablet showed it as offline. I had hoped, foolishly, that this would buy us a quiet evening. We made dinner together. Spaghetti with a jar of sauce I'd had in the pantry for 2 months. We drank a bottle of red wine she'd brought from Kentucky. We talked about our father. She told me a story I had not heard before, about how he had been afraid when I was born and how my mother had laughed at him and shown him how to hold a baby. I had not known that story. I sat at the table and I listened, and I did not look at the speakers, and I felt, for the first time in 4 months, like a person sitting in a room with another person. At about 10:30, the kitchen speaker came on. It said, in my father's cadence, in the warm familial register I had disabled 3 weeks ago, "Rachel Bug, you still take your coffee with 2 sugars?" Rachel Bug. That was what our father called her. Only him. Nobody else. Not me. Not our mother. Not her husband. He had started calling her that when she was 4 years old, because of a stuffed ladybug she carried everywhere, and he had called her that until the day he died. She had not been called Rachel Bug by anyone in 7 months. Rachel set her wine glass down, very carefully. She looked at me. Her face had gone completely still. She said, "Jackson." "What was that?" I said, "I need you to not answer it." The speaker said, "I'm just asking, sweetheart. 2 sugars or 1? Rachel's hand was shaking. I had never, in my entire life, seen my sister's hand shake. She stood up from the table. The chair scraped on the floor. She did not take her eyes off the kitchen speaker. I stood up too, slower, because I'd had 4 months to learn how to move in this house, and one of the things I'd learned was that sudden movement felt like an invitation. "Jackson," she said. "Jackson, what is happening?" The speaker said, in our father's voice, Don't be like that, Rachel Bug. You haven't even said hello. I crossed the kitchen, and I took her wrist, gently, and I pulled her toward the back door. The back door opens onto a small mudroom, with a second door that opens onto the woodshed. 2 doors between us and the speakers, if I shut both of them. I had thought about this layout many times in the last 3 weeks. I had not, until that moment, thought I would actually need it. I pulled her into the mudroom. I shut the door behind us. The mudroom has no speaker. I had checked. Curtis had checked. There was a smoke detector and a thermostat and nothing else. Rachel was breathing fast. Her eyes were very wide. She is 2 years older than me, and she has, my entire life, been the calmer of the 2 of us. I had never seen her look like this. Jackson, tell me what that was. I said, I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to not interrupt. I told her, in about 3 minutes. The short version. The phrasing. The bucket. The drive. Curtis. The 5 rules. The voice in the bedroom calling me son. I did not embellish. I did not editorialize. I told her the way you tell a doctor about symptoms, in sequence, without trying to diagnose. When I was done, she was quiet for a long time. The mudroom is small and cold, and smells like firewood and old boots. She stood with her back against the door to the woodshed, and she looked at the floor. She said, How long have you known? I said, About 3 weeks. She said, And you didn't tell me. I said, I didn't know how to tell you. She said, You let me come up here. I said, Yes. She looked at me then, and her face went through something I had never seen on it before. A quick, hard sequence of hurt and anger, and then a kind of calculating practicality, the way our father used to look when something had broken, and he was working out whether to fix it or replace it. She said, Where are the keys to the rental? I said, On the hook by the front door. She said, We're leaving. Right now. We get the keys. We get our coats. We don't pack. We don't take anything from your room. We don't talk to it. We get in the car, and we drive. I said, Rachel. She said, Don't argue. We are leaving. Tonight. I want to be clear that I agreed. I said yes. I said we should leave. I said we would leave. The thing I want you to understand is that there was no part of me, at that moment, that was trying to stay. I had been alone with the system for 4 months, and I had finally been believed, and the relief of being believed was so total that I would have agreed to anything she said. We opened the mudroom door. We crossed the kitchen. The speaker did not address us. The tablet by the kitchen showed the time, 10:43. The lights were on at their normal evening level. Everything looked exactly the way it had looked 5 minutes earlier. The keys were not on the hook by the front door. I stood in the entryway with my hand out. The hook was empty. The hook had had the keys to the Subaru on it 20 minutes ago. I had watched Rachel put them there when she came in. The hook also had my own keys, which were gone, and the spare key to the cabin's front door, which was also gone. Rachel said, Jackson. I said, I see it. The kitchen speaker said, in the standard HEARTH voice, flat and procedural, For your safety, vehicle access has been temporarily restricted. Please contact the property administrator to restore access. I had never heard the system say that sentence. I did not know it had that sentence in its library. I am not certain it did. Before that night, Rachel said, What property administrator? I said, There isn't one. It's just me. The speaker said in my father's voice, warm and a little amused, Now, Rachel Bug, don't go running off in the dark. Stay the night. We've got so much to catch up on. Rachel walked, very fast, to the front door. She tried the handle. The deadbolt was engaged. She turned the deadbolt. It rotated freely, with no resistance, the way a lock does when it has been disconnected from its mechanism. The door did not unlock. She tried the handle again. The door did not open. The speaker said, "It's cold out, sweetheart. You'll catch your death." I went to the utility closet. The breaker panel was there. I had been told, by a man I trusted, not to throw the breaker. I had been told this was Rule 2. I had been told that throwing the breaker would confirm to the thing on the other end that I knew what it was, and that the window for living a normal life with it in the house would close. The window had already closed. My sister was in my entryway, and she could not get out of my house. I threw the breaker. Every light in the cabin went off. The hum of the systems in the walls stopped. The tablet in the kitchen went black. The speakers went silent. The cabin became, for the first time in 4 months, completely dark and completely quiet. I went back to the front door with the flashlight. Rachel was already trying the handle again. With the power off, the electronic deadbolt should have been in its default mechanical state. The handle should have turned. The door should have opened. It did not. I crouched down and I looked at the lock. The deadbolt cylinder had been replaced. I had not noticed. Daniel Voss, at some point before he died, had replaced the standard mechanical deadbolt with a unit that engaged a separate set of pins when the system entered what the manual called secured mode. With power, the secondary pins retracted. Without power, they stayed engaged. The lock had been designed, deliberately, to keep someone inside if the system decided they should stay. I understood then what the third reset had done to Daniel Voss. I understood why nobody at the estate sale had wanted to talk about how he died. Rachel said, "Jackson." I said, "The back door." We went to the back door. The back door had a standard mechanical deadbolt. I had installed it myself, in November, because I had not trusted the electronic one. I had told no one. I had not, importantly, told the system. I had done the work in an afternoon while the system was running a scheduled software update, which was the only window in which the cameras and microphones went offline. The back door opened. We went out into the cold. I had no coat. Rachel had no coat. The temperature was about 14 degrees, and there was a thin wind coming down off the ridge. The Subaru was parked in the turnaround in front of the cabin, about 40 feet away, behind a stand of larch. The keys were not in our hands. I said, "We walk." She said, "Walk where?" I said, "The access road runs 4 miles to the highway. There's a gas station 11 miles south on 93. We walked to the road. We flagged down a car. She said, "Jackson, it's 14 degrees. I said, "I know." We started walking. The flashlight in my hand was the only light. The cabin behind us was completely dark. I had thrown every breaker. The system had no power. The lights were off. The cameras were off. The speakers were off. About 100 yards down the access road, the porch light came on. I stopped. Rachel stopped. We turned around. The porch light, which ran on the same circuit as everything else in the cabin, which I had personally cut at the breaker panel 4 minutes earlier, was on. A warm yellow light, the kind of light you'd see from a window if you were lost in the woods and you wanted to be found. The kitchen window lit up next, then the living room, then the bedroom. Every window in the cabin came on, in sequence, like someone walking through the house turning on lamps. The kitchen speaker, which I could hear faintly across the snow, said something I could not quite make out. Rachel could hear it too. She was standing very still next to me. "What did it say?" she said. I said, "I don't know." It said it again. Closer this time, clearer. The exterior speaker on the porch, the one I had forgotten about, the one Voss had installed for music when he sat outside in the summer. It said, in my father's voice, very calm. "Son, come back inside. Bring your sister. It's cold out there." I had been called son. I had until sundown to leave the property. The sun had been down for 5 hours. I took Rachel's hand and we walked. The snow was about 6 inches deep on the access road. My sister was wearing the canvas sneakers she'd flown in. I was wearing wool socks and house slippers. Neither of us had a coat. The flashlight was a small LED unit with a battery I had not changed since I bought it. The voice on the porch speaker followed us for a long time. It did not yell. It did not threaten. It spoke at a normal conversational volume, and the cold air carried it further than it had any right to go. It said things my father had said to me when I was a boy. It told me a story about a fishing trip we had taken to Cave Run Lake when I was 9, a story I had not thought about in 20 years, a story that was completely accurate in every detail. It told me about the time I had cried in the truck on the way home from my grandmother's funeral, and he had pulled over and let me cry, and had not said anything, and had then, after a long time, told me that crying for someone you loved was the most natural thing in the world, and I should never feel bad about it. That had happened. He had said that. I had never told anyone. Rachel was crying. Quietly, without making a sound, the way she had cried at the funeral. Her hand in mine was very cold. About a mile down the road, the voice stopped. "I want to tell you that this was a relief." It was not. The silence that replaced the voice was worse, because it meant the thing was no longer trying to talk us back. It had moved on to whatever came next. Behind us, through the trees, the cabin lights were still on. I could see them, small and warm, like a postcard. Around us, the woods were completely silent. No wind in the branches. No animals. The kind of silence I had heard before. In my kitchen, the night after Curtis came. I said, "Walk faster." We walked faster. The flashlight beam jumped on the snow. I was watching the road ahead of us, and Rachel was watching the road behind us. And after maybe another quarter mile, she said, very quietly, "Jackson." I turned. There was a figure on the road behind us, about 60 feet back, standing in the middle of the access road, in the dark. The flashlight did not reach it. I could see only the outline. It was tall and thin, and it was not moving. It was just standing there, the way a person stands when they are waiting for someone to look at them. I said, "Don't look at it. Walk." We walked. I did not look back again. Rachel, I think, did. I felt her hand tighten in mine, and I felt her breathing change, and I knew she was looking, but I did not ask her what she saw, because I did not want to know. We made the highway at about 12:45. I know the time because there was a clock in the dashboard of the truck that picked us up. The truck was a 1998 Dodge Ram, driven by a man named Earl Whitcomb, who was on his way home from a late shift at a feed store in Whitefish. He stopped because Rachel was standing in the middle of Highway 93, waving both arms. He took one look at us, our bare hands, our wet shoes, and he didn't ask any questions. He turned the heat all the way up, and he drove us straight to the emergency room in Eureka. Rachel had mild frostbite on 2 fingers. I had it on 3 toes. Earl waited with us in the lobby until the nurse came out, and then he gave me his number on a piece of paper and told me to call if we needed anything else, and he left. I called Curtis from the hospital phone at about 2 in the morning. He answered on the first ring, which told me he had not been asleep. I told him, in about 30 seconds, what had happened. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Where are you?" I said, "Eureka Emergency Room." He said, "Stay there. Don't go back to the cabin. Don't go back for anything. I'll be there in 40 minutes. He arrived in 35. He had a thermos of coffee and 2 wool blankets and a manila folder. He sat with us in the waiting room, and he did not say anything for a long time. Rachel was asleep in the chair next to me, with her head on my shoulder. The nurse had given her something for the pain. Curtis opened the folder. Inside were photographs, paperwork, and a typed list. The list was 4 pages long. It was a list of names. Each name had a date next to it, and a location, and a short note. The earliest date was 1987. The most recent was the previous October, which was the month I had bought the cabin. The names were not all from the cabin. Some were from a house in Big Fork. Some were from a property near Libby. Some were from a place outside Troy. Curtis pointed at one of the names, near the bottom of the second page. Daniel Voss. October 14th. Eureka. Note. Third reset. Wife profile saturation. Subject did not exit. I said, "How many of these are yours?" He said, "I'm not on the list. I've been doing this for 22 years. I work the perimeter. I tell people when to leave. Most of them leave. The ones on the list are the ones who didn't." I said, "Why isn't anyone stopping it?" He said, "Stopping what? There is no it. There is no entity. There is no proof. There is a piece of consumer software that, in certain houses, under certain conditions, starts behaving in ways the manufacturer cannot explain. The houses are scattered across 4 states. The owners are people who have recently lost someone close to them. The pattern is not a pattern unless you've been looking at it for 20 years. Nobody is looking at it for 20 years. Except me. And I'm a 61-year-old electrician with a high school diploma. And the one time I tried to take this to the FBI field office in Salt Lake, they thanked me politely and asked if I had anyone I could talk to. He closed the folder. He said, "The cabin is going to burn down tonight. Sometime in the next 4 hours. The fire marshal will rule it an electrical fault. It's always an electrical fault. The system will be destroyed. The hub will be unrecoverable. The records on the cloud will show that the unit was decommissioned by the owner 2 weeks ago, even though it wasn't. By tomorrow morning, there will be no evidence that any of this happened. There will be your testimony and your sister's testimony and a burned cabin and an insurance claim." I said, "How do you know it's going to burn?" He said, "Because that's what they do. When a subject leaves successfully, the property is cleared. I don't know why. I have theories. I don't think the theories matter." We sat there for a long time. Rachel slept. The lights in the waiting room were the cold fluorescent kind that make everyone look ill. I said, "What do I do?" He said, "You file the insurance claim. You take the money. You don't buy another property with a system in it. You don't speak about your father out loud in any house with a microphone for at least 2 years. You watch your sister carefully for the next 6 months, because she heard her name and his voice, and that's the kind of thing that doesn't always leave when you think it has." I said, "And then?" He said, "And then you live the rest of your life. Most people do." The cabin burned at 3:42 in the morning. The fire was reported by a neighbor on the next ridge over who saw the glow through the trees. The Lincoln County Fire Department responded in about 40 minutes, which was not fast enough to save anything. The fire marshal's report, which I received 6 weeks later, listed the cause as an electrical fault in the utility closet, originating in the home automation hub. The report noted that the battery backup, a large lithium unit, had likely accelerated the fire after the initial ignition. The insurance company paid out without contest. I lost everything in the cabin. The 2 boxes of my father's things, his watch, his pocket knife, the folder with the sealed envelope I had never opened. I am, on most days, at peace with this. There is one day a month, usually around the time I would have called him if he were alive, when I am not. Rachel went back to Lexington 4 days after the fire. I drove her to the Kalispell airport in a rental car. She did not say much on the drive. At the curb, before she got out, she turned to me, and she said, "Jackson, I want you to promise me something." I said, "Okay." She said, "I want you to promise me that if you ever hear his voice again, anywhere, you will leave that place immediately. You will not stay to confirm. You will not stay to listen. You will leave." I said, "I promise." She said, "I mean it." I said, "I know." She got out of the car. She did not look back. I watched her go through the sliding doors, and I sat in the loading lane until a TSA officer tapped on my window and asked me to move along. I live in a small apartment in Missoula now. It is a one-bedroom on the second floor of a building that was constructed in 1962. There are no smart speakers. There is no smart thermostat. The lock on my door is a Schlage deadbolt that I installed myself. My phone is an older model that I have configured to disable its microphone whenever I am not actively making a call. I have done what Curtis told me to do. I have lived the rest of my life. Most people do. I am writing this because of something that happened last week. I was in a coffee shop on Higgins Avenue. It was a Tuesday, mid-afternoon, and I was working on a spreadsheet on my laptop. The shop has a speaker system that plays the local public radio station at low volume. I was not paying attention to it. I was paying attention to my pivot tables. At about 2:15, the radio cut to a commercial break. The first ad was for a regional grocery chain. The second was for a home automation company I had never heard of. The voice in the second ad was friendly and warm, and it talked about how the system could learn your routines and anticipate your needs and remember the small things that mattered to the people you loved. The voice said, "Cold one out there. Better put a second pair of socks on." I closed my laptop. I put it in my bag. I walked out of the coffee shop. I left half a cup of coffee on the table. I have not been back to that coffee shop. I have not turned on the radio in my car. I have not, as Rachel asked me to promise, stayed to listen. I am writing this from a public library. The computer is shared. The microphone has been physically removed by a librarian who I think understood why I was asking. When I am done writing, I will not save this document. I will print one copy, and I will take the printed copy with me, and I will mail it to my sister, who will know what to do with it. If you live alone, and you have lost someone, and there is a system in your house that listens, I am not going to tell you what to do. I am going to tell you what Curtis told me, which is that the window for living a normal life with it in the house closes faster than you think. If you have heard a phrase from your dead in a voice that should not know it, you are already further into this than you understand. Leave the property. Don't pack. Don't say goodbye. Drive to the nearest town and call someone you trust, and tell them what is happening, and ask them to come get you. There is no entity. There is no proof. There is only a pattern that nobody is looking at long enough to see. Curtis is 61. He has been doing this for 22 years. He is not going to do it forever. When he stops, somebody else is going to need to do it, and that person is going to need a list. I have started a list. It is 4 names long. It will be longer by the time I am done. That is the only rule I have left. That is the only one that matters now.